And it's time again for another episode of Jason's Game Room, the only podcast on YouTube that brings you everything gaming. From board games to CCGs to video games to dice games. If it's gaming, it's on this channel, so you're going to want to tune in every week to find out what's next. Now, on today's episode, I want to talk to you about a certain video game that holds a near and dear spot in my heart because it was one of the best games of its series, which I will go into a little bit of depth on. But without further ado, I want to talk to you today about Gran Turismo 5 for the PS3. In my opinion, it was the best out of all the Gran Turismo games, excluding 6, because I don't have PS4. I never played Gran Turismo 6. I never even played a demo or anything like that. I looked at some screenshots, but aside from that, I never got into it, obviously. People like me can't afford the PS4, so I didn't bother. But Gran Turismo 5 was one of those games that when you heard about that it was going to come out, you really, really anticipated it. And I remember pre-ordering it at the time because the whole series had been really good from the outset. It was a game-changing racing game. And when it finally came out in November of 2010, we were all sitting there going, wow, this is going to be awesome, guys. It's going to be one of the best racing games ever. And for the most part, it did not disappoint. The game came out. It was the first to feature online racing across the PS3 network, so you could connect up to 16 different people in a online room for racing. You'd select your track, get everything figured out, race with your friends, random people. You had the selection of the tracks from the game to keep it interesting. The game featured well over 1,000 cars. I think when you add up all the downloadable content and everything together, it was close to 1,100 cars. There were, I think, close to 80 different tracks. And while I did love some of the classic tracks that they included, some of which being Deep Forest Raceway and Autumn Ring, I was also overjoyed to see the Top Gear test track added to the game because Top Gear as a TV show with Hammond, May, and Clarkson was one of my favorite things for a period of time. And to see that in there and be able to race it and do testing on it was amazing, because it is actually a pretty damn good track. And it holds up very well in the video game world in Gran Turismo 5. It's amazing to be able to do that track just like they do on TV. Even sometimes me and a couple of my friends would log on just to go onto that track and pretend we were filming an episode of Top Gear and test some of the various cars around the track. It was great. And if you also remember, this game was the first to feature licenses from the World Rally Championship, so there were a lot of rally tracks and rally vehicles in there, which made the game extremely more fun. There was NASCAR, which was okay, because you had a limited amount of cars, and there was only a few tracks, which were the super speedways, pretty much. You know, I didn't buy Gran Turismo 5 to play NASCAR, and as much as I had liked certain NASCAR games, in the fact I didn't really do a lot with the NASCAR in the game. I just kind of found it blah compared to actual NASCAR games, which were more involved. And also you had the Super GT licenses, and using those cars and utilizing their liveries and everything, that was fun, because I've always been a fan of Super GT racing. I even went to our International Speedway here in Ontario to watch 4 years in a row. As far as I recall, Gran Turismo 5 was the second best selling PS3 game of all time. And you can see why, because it had so much content and so many things to do aside from just the racing. There was the tweaking aspect of your cars, tinkering with them. You had the ability to put racing numbers on some cars. There were the oil changes and the other work you could do for maintenance. The paint shop itself was a never-ending source of fun, painting wheels and car body colors and everything. It ate up a lot of time, and that's also a good thing, because the more you played Gran Turismo 5, the more you got to know the game and got the feel of it. And if you were like me, you would have a favorite group of tracks, and you'd spend a lot of time on those tracks with your various cars. And me and some of my friends, what we did is, once we had extensive garages of cars, like in the hundreds, we would go online, not so much to race other people, but we would have our own little private room of maybe 5 or 6 of us, and we would set up these rooms for what was called power laps. Now, we wouldn't actually be racing each other. There was points where we'd all be on the track at the same time, obviously. But we would put down power laps, and we would use similar cars, like in a horsepower range, and see who could put down the fastest lap. Because it was more important to us to be able to tinker with the cars and see what we could get them to do. And that was the beauty of Gran Turismo 5. The customization options were there. And after a while, we actually had a lot of people coming into our online rooms because we would set it up and put the title as Power Laps Only. Come in to test your cars for speed and things like that, and power. So we actually got a lot of people into just doing power laps rather than racing around like numbskulls. And that was part of the aspect that made the game fun. And I would do that on my own time as well. In the single player, I would go into the practice sessions and do power laps. And I would actually record them, not just on the game where it would save your lap times, but I'd record them on paper and compare with my friends as well. As far as tracks go in the game, a lot of good tracks, as I mentioned, with the Top Gear test track. Suzuka was fun. One of our favorites that me and my friends used to love to play on was the Nürburgring Nordschleife. That was a hell of a good track to do testing on because that track had everything. And if you were a big Gran Turismo 5 guy, you would want to use that track for testing because it had everything. And then you had international recognized circuits. You had Indianapolis, Monza, Daytona, Laguna Seca, Tsukuba, and some people actually laugh at me, oh, Tsukuba is such a small track. But if you're dealing with 1.5 to maybe 300 horsepower cars, that was perfect for testing and racing. It was a fun little course. And the downloads became available. You had Spa and Twin Ring Motegi. Those were great too, so come on. As terms of manufacturers in the game, you pretty much had everything you could think of. Everything North American, Ford, Chrysler, GM, Acura. You had the Japanese brands in there. You had so many European cars, and that was the best part of Gran Turismo 5 for me, was all the European manufacturers and everything that was in there. Not to mention the used car lot, where you could find great finds if you had more than enough money. And by the time you're in the millions of dollars, you could afford to take a rather overpriced car from the used car lot and tweak it a bit. Not so much as the brand new cars in the game, but as far as the other games in the series compared to this game, you have to understand that when Gran Turismo first started as a series, it was on the original PlayStation, so it was very limited. The graphics at the time were, I guess you could call them revolutionary, and Gran Turismo 2 improved on that. And as I mentioned earlier, Gran Turismo 3 a-spec, I think, is what really brought it mainstream and what made it a great game at that point. Because that was my favorite racing game at that point, was Gran Turismo 3 a-spec. That's when I really turned into a hardcore racer and started paying a lot of attention to the series. 4 was okay. I don't think Gran Turismo 4 really added too much to the game aside from more cars and more tracks, but I don't know. In my perspective, it felt like Gran Turismo 4 was a slight bit of a letdown, and a few of my friends agreed, because we were sitting there going, well, yeah, it's a Gran Turismo game, it's pretty good, but it's, we feel maybe at the same level as number 3, but not much of an improvement. And then 5 came out and changed everything, especially adding the online play and doing what it did, and it still holds up to this day. Do I go back and play it? Very rare. I maybe have that one day out of the year where I say, hey, you know what, I'm going to pop in Gran Turismo 5 and go tweak some cars and play. The main reason for that is because I've been playing Formula 1 games recently, and the controls on the Formula 1 games are a lot tighter. And once you go back to playing Gran Turismo 5, you see that the controls are, unless you're using a full steering wheel and pedals set up, but me, I'm a controller guy, so the controls for Gran Turismo 5 for some reason, seem a bit more clumsy when you go back to it after playing a Formula One game for so long. But on the other flip of a coin, I had stopped playing for a while and played a NASCAR game, and I went back to Gran Turismo 5, and the controls all of a sudden seemed a lot tighter and better. So there's the difference between the games and the controls for you. I'm going to wrap this up with my favorite segment, the highs, the lows, and the downright dirty. The highs of Gran Turismo 5 speak for themselves. Awesome online play, so many cars, your garage is awesome, there's so many things to do in there. The customization options are almost limitless, and then you have that section where you can take pictures of your car in various settings, which is cool, and I was bad for spending too much time doing that. The lows, you could tell sometimes when you're online that the frame rates kind of got a little messed up, and you'd see little patches of graphics that were a little weird. But this was only if you had a full 16 people in a room, and if someone else's connection or multiple connections were lagging, that would happen. One of the other lows was a lot less customization options on a used car versus a brand new car. I think they could have just given you full custom. Yeah, you could have done that with the used cars as well rather than just the new, because it kind of took away from buying the used cars. It took away some of the motivation because you knew you could only take it so far and not do as much. So I would have rather they'd put full customization characteristics to it. And the fact that some of the best cars in the game are horribly overpriced, and even some of the used cars. So that was part of the lows, was that there was the cost of some of the cars. It was a little silly, and we're going past real world costs as well. So when you take into account it's a video game, it's even more annoying. The downright dirty. And the only thing in my mind, of the years of playing this game, that is the downright dirty is online play. And by this I mean the fact that the regulation on the online play is odd, because they should have maybe assigned skill levels or something, because you'd have too many little kids coming in there and ruining a room with adults trying to have a serious race, or you'd have so many people creating rooms where the headline said drag only, quarter-mile drag. But if anyone that plays the game knows, there is no drag racing in Gran Turismo 5. People would literally load a track that had a long straightaway, and they'd just sit in there all night and fucking drag race instead of racing. And you'd try to go in there to find a room with good racing, and they'd either be full, or you'd see like 100 goddamn rooms full of just people, oh, drag racing only. Just stop. Do something else other than that. I think they could have regulated the online a bit more, or at the very least maybe put in a drag strip into the game for people like that to play on, so they wouldn't have to take up space with everything else. And as well as the downright dirty would have to be turning damage on online, because that was just a shit show. That's why I never did it after a certain point. The online aspect was a shit show more often than not, and it was downright dirty. But that's all I got to say about that. If you're still out there playing Gran Turismo 5, power to ya. It's still one of the greatest racing games of all times. And I hope to see everybody back on the next show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, go screaming in the street. I don't care how you do it, just do it. Have a great day, everybody. And game on!